Hello, my name is Mary Yoon, and my presentation is on the Irish migration. In this presentation, I will be discussing how the Irish potato famine led to a huge migration from Ireland to America, causing the USA's culture, population, and economy to change forever. To start us off, I would like you all to imagine America without any flour. In case you don't realize the impact of this means that America doesn't have any pizza, no hamburgers, no sandwich bread, no Twinkies, not even any cookies. As you can see, suddenly America, with a population of 315 million people, is left malnourished. Imagining this, you can begin to picture what it was like for Ireland when the Irish potato famine hit in the 1800s. Much like flour is the staple for America or rice is the staple for Korea, potatoes were the staple for Ireland. As you saw on the previous slide, when you take away the country's main source of sustenance, it's suddenly left malnourished and it doesn't have proper nutrition at all. So you can imagine how terrible it was when all of the potatoes started rotting. An example of this is the picture on the right. That is what a potato would have looked like in the 1800s during the potato famine. As you can see, that doesn't look very appetizing and that doesn't look very edible. Basically, what started happening was a fungus that came all the way from Mexico started taking over all of the potatoes, and all of them started rotting, and something called the famine fever started spreading throughout all of Ireland. This famine fever included lice, cholera, dysentery, typhus, and scurvy, and suddenly many people were dying, and many people were migrating. Great Britain did try to create relief systems for the Irish people, but unfortunately, most of them actually backfired on them. For instance, they tried to take the taxes off of corn, but most of the Irish people, most of the population was still too poor to even afford the corn, even without the tax. And within 10 years, 750,000 people had died from the potato famine. However, instead of dying and giving up hope, many of them decided to migrate too. 3.5 million of the Irish people migrated. They went all over the world, but specifically to America. By 1880, about 3.5 million Irish people were in America, most of which were immigrants. However, the journey there wasn't exactly pleasant. 40% of the steerage passengers died at sea. The steerage passenger are the passengers that were crowded below and not allowed to use the deck. And as you can imagine, disease spread very quickly within that small area of space, which was very crowded. On top of this, most of the Irish people were actually too poor to have any hope. They didn't have any means of making money or paying rent or feeding themselves, even when they got to America. However, most of them were able to find jobs with the government, which were provided for them, such as building roads and railroad tracks and many buildings, boilermakers, such things like that. By 1990, the Irish made up 1/3 of the U.S.'s boilermakers, plumbers, and steam fitters. As you can begin to imagine, the migration to the U.S. had many effects on the U.S. and Ireland, mostly the U.S. Most of the Irish people who migrated lived in Irish communities which had Catholic churches, celebrated Irish traditions and holidays, and had much of the Irish culture lingering around. On top of this, most of America's cities that you know today were actually built by the Irish people. Because the Irish people had no hope and they couldn't find jobs very easily at all, the government was able to provide many of them, which included building America's cities. Ireland's population decreased dramatically when the potato famine hit and most of the Irish people migrated. Even today, Ireland doesn't have even half of what it used to have before this catastrophe hit. On top of this, Americans became very hostile towards the Irish people, especially the Protestants, who were kind of angry at the whole Catholic movement that was going on in the U.S. The Protestants led anti-Catholic rioting, and they tried to make it very difficult for any immigrants who had come to America to become a citizen, therefore making the immigrants' life even more difficult. In conclusion, The Irish potato famine led to the migration, and the Irish people were migrated all over the world, but especially to the US, as you can see on the right. Life was very difficult for the Irish people, and because of their economic status, they had absolutely no hope in making their lives any better than it was in Ireland. On top of this, there were many effects in both Ireland and the US. Americans became hostile, and because of that, Irish had it very, very difficult. The effects changed both Ireland and the US forever.